This is Duke University.
We're going to switch over to our next group of speakers, and I'm going to let you, in the interest of time, just look at the sheet of paper that's on every seat for their bios. But it's going to be an interesting perspective to kind of switch from the nonprofit space to people who are kind of in the realm of kind of digging into the dirt and actually putting pipes and things in the ground and planning around it. So I'll just let Mitch kickstart things, and I will yell at you when you're time.
All right, so hello everyone, I'm Mitchell Silver, Chief Planning Officer in Raleigh. I have 27 slides in 10 minutes, so I'm going to move very, very quickly. I have a pen ready. Before I start, I'm not an environmental expert, but I run a very large department and we deal with environmental planning. Let me just say, I think that in our city, what has happened over the years, because there wasn't full support for environmental planning, that we really don't have those experts in-house any longer. It's been replaced with sustainability, assuming that will take care of the environment. We have stormwater engineers, but so what we tried to do through our planning, even when we wrote our comprehensive plan, we didn't have anybody on staff to actually write that chapter. We had to rely on our consultants. So it's something I think that if the residents don't see the need or the urgency, they just don't see a need for environmental planning. So I'm going to go through this all very quickly. I'd like to remind people that Raleigh is tied as one of the fastest, Raleigh-Cary Metro over 1 million, is tied for one of the fastest growing metropolitan region over the past 10 years, and it's predicted to be that way going forward. So as a result, for us, it's not just about quantity, it's about quality, and so we're very focused on making sure as we grow that we make sure we maintain a very high quality environment. So what had happened when I came on board back in 2005, I recognized because of this growth we needed a new plan, very different than what we had in the past, based on the automobile and a whole different framework. And I felt we had to do something very different going forward. And so we launched this back in 2006 and ultimately had it adopted in 2009. What we try to do very quickly is rethink the way we do things. I like the three parent, in terms of design, create and build. We look very carefully at our emerging issues, trends, and challenges. Our land availability, for the first time, we looked at how much land we had left. Back in 2007, we identified we had 20,000 acres left within our jurisdiction. And we challenged the public to say, how are we going to use this incredible resource if we're going to grow by 120,000 households over that time period? We had to find a place to put people at the same time, conserve land, make sure we do it properly. So that was our challenge. And so this is what we had to deal with. You can see most of our land was to the eastern part of the city, both in the northeast and the southeast. And we had to find how to accommodate this growth without it sprawling throughout a region, which had been the pattern in the Raleigh region. We grew over the last 50 years by 408%, but we consumed 3.5 times of land to accommodate that growth, and we felt that it would not be sustainable going forward. When I came on board, like many of us, we had a silo approach. The innovation I'm going to talk about is how we start to organize ourselves to plan for the future, and this is the department I now head. We had silos of excellence. Each person was very good at what they did, and we felt going forward that that wasn't going to work. And as an ecosystem is a system, we knew that fragmented government produces fragmented results. Each department was very good at doing their own thing, but they weren't good at working together, and we had to set out a very different approach on how we're going to plan going into the future. So we shifted from the silos of excellence to a systems approach, and this is where we are right now today. As we start to plan for the environment, we have to understand that one department, one level of expertise cannot do this alone. All of these systems are interconnected, and we had to take a very different approach going forward. And we are now in this rebuilding process right now with support from council and the city administration. When we did our comprehensive plan, we had to push back very hard because our Office of Sustainability wanted to do a standalone sustainability chapter and sustainability element, and we said no. That is a mistake. If you're going to plan for people, the economy, and the environment, it has to be a common thread throughout the entire document, and that's exactly what we were able to do. And so this is our approach up front. It's in the beginning of our comprehensive plan, that as we plan for the future, we have to integrate all three. We cannot look at just the environment as a standalone element because it's connected to people, it's connected to the economy, and it's connected to our systems. And so in the end, without getting into too much, these are the 6 themes which drove our comprehensive plan. The one I'll talk a little bit about is the green print, sustainable development. This is how we wanted to go forward to ensure that we don't just grow by numbers, but we maintain that quality is why people are moving here to our region. But this is the point that I wanted to really emphasize, is as we look at a city, it is both people, it's land uses, but it's the systems that tie it together. And as we talk about the ecosystem, I have both what I call kind of the hard systems and some of the soft systems. When we look at the hard systems, the way I describe it, because I teach a class up at Harvard about this, and I explain to the students that as a city grows, you rely on these systems. And you know, the average citizen does not even realize that these systems exist until it shuts down for a day. They don't take it for granted. They don't understand how we need these systems, which helps us basically move and do things that we do as a city. But I have the soft systems, and why do I have the ecosystem and the soft system? If we would shut down the ecosystem for the day, would the average citizen even notice? Compared to the road network or water, if you turn it on, or electricity. And so while it's very important from our perspective to communicate the importance of environmental planning to our average citizen, they just don't get it, particularly in an environment like the Triangle region, where you see trees and you just take it for granted that the environment is just part of how we live. And so this is our challenge as we start to plan for our ecosystems here in the Triangle region. But what we did decide to do was focus on what we did for the first time is the green print. We had a blueprint for growth. We now want to have a green print for growth. And this is right now our focus over the next few years of how we're going to start to build to have that green print for how we grow that complements the blueprint. And it does focus on our park system, our greenways, but now we're looking for other opportunities as we look for green infrastructure. We're looking at our greenway as a transportation system, not just as a recreation resource, and how we can start doing more and more development to actually complement not just our blueprint, but our green print. But this is our blueprint, and this is how we are expected to grow over the next 30 years by having growth centers and corridors, and this requires a lot of conservation. Everything you see in dark colors is where we expect development to grow, but the other areas is where we're now seeking to conserve that land that will remain low density, and so this will be complemented with a green print of how we go forward. So we have the framework in place. We don't have the details in place, and quite frankly, we don't even have the environmental planners on staff. We have mostly sustainability policy experts. We have engineers in stormwater and other parts of public works, but it's shocking a city of our size, we no longer have the environmental planners we had back in the 1990s. There's a reason for that. We had some conservative mayors that decided that environmental planning was not important as we grow as a city. We now have to build that up, but right now we're relying on experts. So when we design our environmental protection chapter in our code, in our plan, we had to reach out to others, and you can see all the elements that we focused in our chapter. I'm going to talk a little bit about design with nature, but these are basically the core elements we looked at in our comprehensive plan of how we're going to plan our city over the next 20 years. I do want to say that there were some related elements for parks, recreation, and open space, and we also looked at some regional resources because we recognize when you plan for the environment, you can't stop at your borders. So there's certainly some policies that look at how we coordinate, not just with Raleigh, but with Wake County and the Triangle region. So as we focus on design with nature, we specifically said in our plan that an ecosystem approach to grow should be the hallmark of how the city grows and flourishes. So that's our goal for the city. Unfortunately, I don't think we have the personnel in place to start to pull that off, but we're beginning that process. Some of the key policies dealing with design with nature talks about green infrastructure, environmental sensitive development, open space, and all the elements you see here. Road design and landscape preservation, that's something we've made some huge leaps on right now, and we're actually talk about that in a second. Some of the key actions is a green infrastructure plan. I can't wait to hear Mami talk because that's something I'm very intrigued about what's happening in Philadelphia. I'm quite envious because we'd like to have something like that as well. We're supposed to have a green infrastructure team. It's not in place yet, but our goal is as we start to look at a green infrastructure plan, we actually want to have a team. We do a great job with park acquisition. We had a goal of 250 acres a year. We're not there, but if you don't know about Raleigh, we're very good at building greenways, about acquiring parks, and now we're actually moving into the environmental sensitive development controls. That's something we're now looking at the next wave of our code as we update our codes going forward. Some key accomplishments. Let me first say, as you all know, in North Carolina, Implementation is challenged due to the, let's just say, legislative philosophy in our state about how they value environmental planning. Capitol Boulevard, one of the major gateways into our city, we did a major plan, found out the entire boulevard below 40 is in a floodplain. It's in a buffer. So while we were looking at key development, we realized that we had some challenges. But we are starting to acquire some land within the floodplain. What was going to be development is now going to be a park. We're doing significant park and greenway acquisition. In our development code, we have new streetscape standards with more verges to put in place for hopefully more green infrastructure, more trees, and I'll just jump down to the bottom. We now have conservation subdivisions that now give benefits in exchange for more open space and reduced lot sizes. I'm going to move through this very quickly because I got the 2-minute warning. Our key thing is, how do we implement? When you look at the infrastructure, how do you start to implement? Traditionally, planning had 3 ways. They planned it, they zoned it, they built it. Over time, capital improvement was taken away from planning, and it was given to economic development. And I'm probably going to get the 1-minute warning. So we have to figure out, how are we going to do the things that we do before we start? If I don't see a path toward implementation, I don't want to hide an expectation and tell the public, here are the things we want to do, and don't have the ability to do it. So for the time being, we're focusing on policy recommendations, action items, and development code. We don't have the capital to do the things we want to do. I was intrigued by some of the presentations, but we definitely want to move in this direction, so that's what we're thinking about right now. I did set up a new implementation team. We're now going to focus that if we want to start putting in green infrastructure, we have to figure out how to do it. And so that'll be the key focus starting in January about how we're going to move forward to start implementing projects like Capitol Boulevard. I'll go quickly through Capitol Boulevard in about 30 seconds. If you're all familiar with it, this is a project. We did a study, found out it's all in the floodplain. We want to put new bikeways, walkways. It's going to be a high-speed rail, transit, but it's all within a bowl. And so what we're doing right now is focusing on some water quality issues. This is Pigeon House Branch, the most impaired water stream in the state of North Carolina. And so right now we want to daylight it to make sure we now have a river walk in our downtown. And so there are certainly some challenges. If you don't know, there's significant flooding as a result. Capitol Boulevard occasionally in Crabtree is underwater. And so we want to make sure that as we do development, we'll look at places like Chattanooga to make sure as we plan. This is the Milner Inn, by the way, that we're about to purchase, so that we can now tear that down and use that as an open space resource. And then, of course, build in some of the greenways, which is part of the Capitol Boulevard plan. So a major change from the developed corridor, and now we're looking at an ecosystem because it's in the floodplain and development is no longer appropriate in that corridor. So I'm going to close on this slide that we're trying to change the way we do things as we design with nature. It requires a whole rethinking about our planning department, which used to do environmental planning, and we no longer do it. And so without going into it, we want to deploy not just an outreach strategy, but an in-reach strategy, find out from other departments how we start to work together, because typically they're not on board. They all want to plan in silos. We want to now plan as a systems. We want to help visualize risk. We have to do a better job of not just talking to the public, but visualizing all of these impacts or opportunities so they can see it in 3 dimensions, not just hearing it from us in words. Focus on implementation, be proactive, not just reactive. People don't see the threat if we don't plan from an environmental point of view. We have to do a better job of articulating it, again, not just with words, but with visuals. And with that, I thank you. 27 slides in.
So you have to talk just as fast.
Okay. I'll just talk baby talk instead. My name is Mami Hara, and I work for a very large water utility in Julia Rockwell. We used to work there as well. Our utility seeks to holistically manage the entire water environment of our city, Philadelphia. One of the regulated sectors of water that we manage is stormwater, and there are a lot of very important environmental and regulatory reasons to manage stormwater. But in an old city like Philadelphia, and like many old cities around the country, that management is complicated by an infrastructural history that has treated rainwater as a waste product. and really predicated planning and infrastructure design on conveying that water out of cities as quickly as possible, and often combining it with sanitary waste. In dry weather, that mixed sewage goes into treatment facilities, but in wet weather, when the systems, when our stormwater system becomes surcharged, that combined sewage flows into rivers and streams here in Philadelphia and around the country. Just so you get a scale, a sense of the scale of our issues. 2/3 of our city, which is about 143 square miles, is served by a combined sewer system. And the conventional way of dealing with that kind of system and the combined sewer overflows that occur there is through an approach that we affectionately call BATs, or big-ass tanks. And those tanks are usually, or always, very, very expensive to build and to power. And they are way beyond the affordability of a poor city and the residents of a city like Philadelphia. So our utility is trying a different way. We're trying to implement an approach that treats stormwater as a resource and encourages it to soak into the ground, recharge water supplies, support vegetation, effectively greening our city through extensive development of green stormwater infrastructure. So unlike bats, which provide no benefit until they're fully complete after decades of construction and bazillions of dollars of investment, green infrastructure provides immediate return with every little bit as it's developed, and those benefits accrete. So we started our program with the hypothesis that green infrastructure developed at a large scale could bring a whole host of benefits, or what we're calling here today ecosystem services. And in our planning, we evaluated what are the range of benefits that could come with the different types of investments that our utility and our city could make. And we developed a very robust triple bottom line analysis about 5 years ago that helped us considerably in our negotiations with our regulators. Most of our work is highly regulated in the water sector, and we need, most of the time, agreements are achieved through extensive and very expensive litigation. But in a mutual understanding of the potential benefits and the reasonableness of our program allowed for a negotiated settlement of a program that entails $2 billion in public expenditure over 25 years to implement a green infrastructure program that intends to change the way that rainfall is managed on 10,000 acres of our city, or the equivalent of 1/3 of our existing impervious cover. It's a very challenging goal in a city that has such a high level of development and density as Philadelphia does. We really believe strongly in it because we feel that there's a potential to really leverage our significant utility investments to advance other mutually supportive agendas like recreation, public health, inclusive economic opportunity, environmental education, and on and on. Right? There are very few levers in a poor city besides water, and our goal is to create a virtuous cycle of investment, wherein our consistent utility investments that are distributed and throughout communities increase the economic power and the ability of our ratepayers and the communities to support additional investments in green infrastructure and then enhance their communities and so on, right? So that we can just create a stronger city and a stronger utility in a virtuous cycle. And you know, in a short talk like this, I can only talk about the whys of our program. I really can't talk about the very, very complex and all-important how of you know, how we're planning to do it. But nor can I talk about the really extensive programs in protection, energy, resource rehabilitation, resource management that are part and parcel of our vision for Green City Clean Waters. But you know, we're working extensively to transform a city that looks pretty much like this into, you know, the greatest city in the country. And you know, I really look forward to today's discussion to figure out how to do it better.
Good morning. So I'm Dale Lyons, and I'm the Director of Freshwater Programs for the Nature Conservancy's New Mexico chapter. And when I'm not working on endangered species recovery work on the San Juan River, the northwest corner of New Mexico, and restoration of natural flows on the Gila River in southern New Mexico, I am working on developing a fairly large-scale 1.4 million acre water source protection fund in the Rio Grande Valley, New Mexico. And that program is based on a program that I helped develop in the city of Santa Fe when I was a municipal water manager, relatively new to the Nature Conservancy. I just started there in June, actually. But Santa Fe has a population of about 70,000 people. And we have sort of the ideal laboratory for establishing a payment for ecosystem services for water source protection program. Because the watershed, the municipal watershed, which is this area outlined in green, is closed to the public, and it provides water directly to city water infrastructure. And the land that is in the municipal watershed, the 17,000 acres of municipal watershed, is administered by the Forest Service. So aside from the footprints of the city's reservoirs, which have a storage capacity of about 4,000 acre feet, all the land surrounding and the national forest around is all national forest, federally owned land. So the city of Santa Fe, the Santa Fe River actually is really an important water source for the community. It provides about 40% of the city's water supply. The balance of the water coming from municipal supply wells in the city and also to the west towards the Rio Grande, and it's only been since 2011 that the city is now diverting water directly from the Rio Grande trans-basin water from the headwaters of the Colorado River. And so another thing that's important to note, if any of you have been following sort of land management issues in the West, is that you know, since the late 1800s and the early 1900s, when there was a lot of logging going on in this area and grazing, we've also been living through a fairly wet period since the early 1900s, and only now we're kind of coming into a long-term drought. And so those conditions created heavily overstocked forests that are highly prone to significant wildfires, catastrophic wildfires, that are impacting surface water quality in rivers in New Mexico and all across the West. So some of the fires you might be familiar with, this is the Cerro Grande fire in 2000, burned about 50,000 acres and was a really expensive fire, cost the federal government about $1 billion to do fire suppression, rehabilitation, and also compensation to affected landowners. This is, by the way, probably the last fire that was called a controlled burn. It was lit by the Park Service, and thereafter, because it got out of control, they're now called prescribed burns. So this fire came fairly close to it, and this is our municipal watershed right in here in this area. And several years went by until the next large fire, which was the Las Conchas fire, again in the Jemez Mountains on the other side of the Rio Grande, which burned about 150,000 acres to the tune of about $240 million, both in rehabilitation costs and fire suppression, and also economic impacts. And also in that same fire season, in that same year, 2011, a 10,000-acre fire fairly near our municipal watershed. So these fires have really prompted the communities to take a hard look at the conditions within our municipal watershed, knowing that wildfire really isn't, it's not a question of if a wildfire were to occur, but just when, and the management strategy is actually to reduce the risk of wildfire so that we can avoid the impacts to our drinking water system, don't lose our drinking water supply, and it's much more cost effective to actually treat these forests to reduce wildfire hazard than to deal with the impacts of a catastrophic wildfire. So severe fires jeopardize water supplies in some significant ways. The first is water quality impacts. The second is property impacts in water supply infrastructure, and also sediment impacts. And sediments, sediment and debris flow and ash flows after significant fires tend to happen in the monsoon period, monsoon rain events, high-intensity storms, short-duration storms following the fire season. And so that mobilizes a lot of material that can impact drinking water infrastructure. And if you're operating reservoirs, water supply reservoirs that are reliant or capturing snowmelt runoff, and your reservoirs fill up with sediment and ash, you lose the ability to store water. And if you lose the ability to store water, you can't deliver that water to your customers. So I will skip over this. This is some case examples from some other communities, but the municipal water supply project in Santa Fe is really a project that at its core is a connection between downstream water users and upstream land managers. So through the city water customers' water bills, funds are pooled to then pay for forest treatments, cost shared with the Forest Service on land operated by and administered by the Forest Service. So these are some lands that have undergone treatment in the municipal watershed in the lower 7,000 acres of the 17,000 acre watershed. There are plans going forward to do additional treatments in the wilderness area, mostly in this mixed conifer zone here. This is all ponderosa pine, which posed the highest initial risk to the drinking water supply. So this is sort of in a collaborative program between the city's water departments, fire departments, the Watershed Association, a local nonprofit, and the Nature Conservancy and the Forest Service, of course. The centerpiece of this program is a municipal watershed plan that laid out the framework for water management, education, and outreach to engage the community, let them know about the important work that we're doing in the municipal watershed, detail about the prescriptions that were to be done, when and where, and an innovative financial management plan that has proposed a payment for ecosystem services financial model to generate sustainable funding to do the treatments and also just maintain the treatments that had already taken place, but also treat areas further upstream in the watershed that still pose risk to the city's water supply. And I'll talk quickly about a willingness to pay survey that was done in 2011. So in development of this program, we did a survey, a fairly extensive survey with the Nature Conservancy, the city and the Conservancy, to gauge the public's understanding of the risks to water supply and their willingness to pay money to protect their water source. Because prior to this program, municipal water customers only paid for the treatment and delivery of the water, not the protection of their water source. And we found that there was overwhelming support for the minimum. In fact, the amount we actually would require for the program was closer to about 50 cents per month for among the 30,000 water customers. But even at $2, most of the people were at least somewhat willing to pay. And a recent willingness to pay survey that was conducted in Flagstaff for their water source protection fund found that water customers are willing to pay up to $5 a month to protect their water source from the same risk of water supply. Just to mention, these programs are springing up across the West. As I mentioned, Flagstaff, they passed a $10 million bond, municipal bond, backed by property tax revenue to pay for fuel treatments, fuel reduction work, and forest restoration work in lands administered by the Forest Service, so not within the city limits. Santa Fe's plan, we've spent over about $8.5 million over 10 years. Salt Lake City raises and spends about $1.5 million a year to protect 7 municipal watersheds. And then Denver Aurora Water has spent about $16.5 million to date, and that's just for preventative work, and they've spent about $30 million for dredging and mitigation after the Hayman and Buffalo Creek fires from impacts to their water supply infrastructure. So with that, I'll stop. How do I deliver for you? Okay, thank you. Thank you very much. My name is Robert Garcia. I'm the founding director and counsel of the City Project. We are a nonprofit policy and legal advocacy organization. We are based in Los Angeles. I am a civil rights attorney. The City Project focuses on 4 major areas that are relevant today, and I have to talk quickly because I have 7 minutes, and I'm going to cover 80 years of landscape design, 50 years of civil rights laws, 20 years of environmental justice, order, and 13 years of the history of the City Project. The 4 areas are equal access to parks and recreation, number 1. Number 2, physical education in schools of hope. Number 3, addressing health disparities for people in underserved communities. And number 4, green jobs and wealth creation. And you might very well ask, as I did, what does that have to do with innovations in environmental planning? But in fact, that's why I'm here, is to talk about how these are civil rights issues as well as planning issues. The Olmsted vision. May received their degree in landscape architecture from Harvard. Frederick Law Olmsted created the field of landscape architecture in the United States, and he designed the landscape architecture program by telling his son what to take at Harvard. And that's a true story. In 1930, the Olmsted brothers, the firm started by his sons, created a plan for Los Angeles called, appropriately enough, Parks, Playgrounds, and Beaches for the Los Angeles region. I'm sorry if I sound disoriented and jet lagged. It's because I am. I just flew in from LA, and it's 3 hours earlier, I think, and I think it's Thursday. So they did this plan in 1930, and if it had been implemented, today Los Angeles would be one of the greenest and most beautiful cities, most sustainable cities in the nation. But unfortunately, only 200 copies of the plan were printed, enough for the Blue Ribbon Commission that asked them to prepare the plan, and instead we have the reality that you'll see in a moment. But in terms of innovation and environmental planning, there really isn't any. The Olmsteds had it right in 1930. They said what we needed was a network of parks and green space, first of all. Second, interconnected with schools of 5 acres or more of playing fields. And 3, with a transportation system that would get you throughout the network. And 4, they emphasized that people of color and low-income people had the worst access to these resources, and so resources needed to be prioritized there. But it was published in the height of the Great Depression. It called for multi-agency authority and dedicated funding for parks into the future so that you could ride out economic bad times, and all of those things were seen as not necessary in 1930, because after all, that was before freeways, when LA was still wide open, so who needed all that anyway? Actually, one more point on this. I should have used the original Olmsted plan here. It's on my wall. It really is the vision that inspires much of our work. This is actually a GIS version of it, because these men were so brilliant that in 1930, using paper and pencil and just driving around, walking around LA and knowing LA, they were able to publish this map, this report with 200 pages of exactly where they were proposing parks, exactly which schools had 5 acres or more playing fields,
And using the descriptions in that plan, I turned it over to our GIS people and I said, can we map this? And they generated this map, which looks almost exactly like their hand-drawn map from 1930, first of all. Second, when we went to the city of LA, and the county of LA, and the Los Angeles Unified School District around 2005, and we asked them, can we have all the data on where the parks are and where the schools with 5 acres or more playing fields are? They said, we can't produce that. The schools, for example, said, we don't know how many schools have 5 acres or more playing fields because so much land has been devoured by portable classrooms and modular classrooms, and we also don't know what land we own, so all we can do is give you a best guess. So this is the original Olmsted plan, using the data that we collected and created the most up-to-date electronic database of parks and school fields in LA. We created this 21st century version, and it reflects the fundamental reality in Los Angeles that children of color living in poverty with no access to a car have the worst access to parks, the worst access to schools with 5 acres or more of playing fields. They have the highest levels of childhood obesity and diabetes, and they are the most at risk for gangs, crime, drugs, and violence. Since Mami used the term bats, big-ass tanks, I feel free to explain that from a statistical standpoint, this is known as a multivariable map. I'm an attorney. We have a technical common law Anglo-Saxon term. We call this the really fucked map. If you live in one of those red hotspots, you are really but we don't just do planning and academic studies, although we do publish studies. This is published in 2011, reflects 11 years of work of the city project. That we don't measure success by planning and publishing, we measure success by the smiles on children's faces playing in parks and schools that did not exist before. So that, for example, in the upper right corner is what is Rio de Los Angeles State Park at Taylor Yard. Before it was an abandoned rail yard. We brought a lawsuit to make that happen as part of the greening of the LA River. On the upper left, our children's schoolyard. We worked with the Los Angeles Unified School District to raise $27 billion to build 130 new schools and modernize existing schools and create $27 billion worth of green jobs and contracts. Each of those is in a different. Each of those pictures is from a different county that we've worked on. I say all this because, despite the fact that we have known this for at least 11 years since the city project started working on this and mapping it, and again, that's a multivariable map showing demographics, green space, school fields, transportation access, and so on. We were quite surprised when the city of Los Angeles published earlier this year the so-called City Health Atlas. And the good news is it was done between the city of LA and the county of LA with funding from the Centers for Disease Control. And they have about 200 pages and 100 maps, and they analyze some 80 variables, including park space, demographics, race, color, national origin, income, poverty, walkability index, bike index, food security index, and so on. And they even develop what they call a health equity index, which purports to combine many of these variables so that you have a number and you can use it to compare if you live in Bel Air, how are you doing compared to if you live in South Central Los Angeles in the inner city, for example. But we looked at that health atlas, and there's one map, map 15, that shows where people of color live, and map 63, some 48 maps later, shows where parks are, and no apparent effort to connect the dots. And this isn't rocket science. As I say, we publish this. You go to our website on Map Justice, you can get that report, as well as individual reports for 6 or 7 counties. But we looked at that City Health Atlas, and this is what I call poor man's GISing. We printed out map 15 where the people of color live, and we printed out map 63 where the parks are, and I literally taped them to my window in my office, one on top of the other, and I took a picture of it with my cell phone. I don't make these things up, as you can see. And I believe the city, county, and Centers for Disease Control had more money than God to do this study, but it didn't occur to anybody to compare these things. And a picture is worth 1,000 words, and this is 2 pictures, so that's 2,000 words right there. But if you know LA, you know right away. Where people of color live, there will be no parks. Where there are parks, there are no people of color. And that's what that map, Gorman's GISing, shows. So because it's a sophisticated conference, I figured, well, I can't just use my iPhone photo of 2 maps on top of each other. We had our GIS expert take the 2 GIS maps and in Photoshop lay them on top of each other. And you can see up there map 15 and map 63. My point is this. There are laws that address these disparities. I am an attorney. I'm a recovering litigator. I'm a former federal prosecutor, assistant United States attorney in the Southern District of New York. When we see disparities like this, we think to ourselves, is there anything we can do about it under the civil rights laws? And the answer is yes. There are equal protection laws that protect equal access to public resources. They prohibit intentional discrimination. They prohibit unjustified and unnecessary discriminatory impacts. This includes Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and its regulations. As I say, it's 50 years. Next year is the 50th anniversary of Title VI. And municipalities still don't get it, and the Centers for Disease Control still doesn't get it, that this has implications for urban planning, mapping, and where you put parks, schools, pools, and other good things. The President's Order 12898 on environmental and health justice passed, or was signed by President Clinton in 1994, so next year is the 20th anniversary of the President's Order on environmental justice. And you can search through the City Health Atlas, and there's not a mention of 12898 or of Title VI. And when I call them and I say, what about that? They say, what's Title VI? What's 12898? What's environmental justice? So I'm charitable. I tell them, what about the Affordable Care Act, Section 1557, which just passed a few years ago? And aside from all the web problems, it's a good law. And Section 1557 prohibits health discrimination in programs or activities funded by the federal government, which includes virtually everything every municipality does. Virtually nobody knows about Affordable Care Act Section 1557. There's also parallel state laws. So in 1557, we submitted public comments to the Department of Health and Human Services on how to implement those regulations and that statute in line with with Title VI and the President's Order 12898. So that is an example of an abandoned rail yard that we transformed into a park. The LA Times called it a heroic monument and a symbol of hope. That's what planning, civil rights, parks, clean water have to do with each other. Thank you very much.